It was a regular afternoon, the kind of day when people hurried in and out of McDonald's, looking for a quick meal between errands. The restaurant buzzed with energy, children laughing in the play area, workers chatting at tables during their lunch breaks, and the sound of the fryer popping in the background. Nobody inside expected anything unusual to happen that day. Then the door opened, and a figure stepped inside that made almost everyone pause. It was Shaquille O'Neal, better known as Shaq. Even out of the basketball world, his presence was impossible to miss. Standing over 7 feet tall, broad-shouldered, and instantly recognizable, Shaq filled the doorway like a giant walking into a small room. A few kids gasped, pointing with excitement. One whispered loudly, "Mom, it's Shaq!" while another scrambled to pull out a phone, hoping to catch a picture. Shaq was used to reactions like this. Wherever he went, he drew attention, but he never let it bother him. Instead, he gave a small smile and a wave to the kids, his deep voice rumbling a friendly, "Hey, how y'all doing?" He wasn't there to cause a scene. He was simply hungry and wanted something familiar and quick. Even someone as famous as Shaq sometimes craved a Big Mac and fries. He walked up to the counter, his steps heavy but calm, and placed his order. The cashier, barely reaching his chest in height, looked up in awe, grinning nervously as she punched in the numbers. "That'll be right out, Mr. O'Neal," she said with a shaky smile. Shaq just chuckled and replied, "Just call me Shaq." Taking his tray, he scanned the room for a seat. Most people kept sneaking glances, whispering to one another, but no one wanted to intrude. He chose a spot near the corner, a little away from the crowd, where he could sit peacefully and enjoy his meal. Even though he had been a superstar on the court and was still a celebrity. Eye off it, Shaq had always loved blending into everyday places. Fast food joints, local shops, gas stations. He liked being around regular people. As he unwrapped his burger, he looked around with his usual observant nature. Shaq had a big personality, but he was also the kind of man who noticed small details. He saw the young couple laughing over shared fries, the construction worker scrolling on his phone, the group of teenagers daring each other to order the spiciest nuggets. It was all ordinary, but Shaq appreciated the ordinary. Not far from him sat a small family. At first glance, nothing unusual. A young boy, no more than 5 years old, sat quietly at the table. His feet barely touched the floor, swinging slightly as he stared down at his Happy Meal. Next to him was a woman who appeared to be his mother. She smiled at him now and then, but her smile seemed tense, forced, as if something weighed heavy on her mind. Across from them sat a man, broad and stern-faced, his posture stiff, his eyes scanning the room in a way that made Shaq's instincts stir. Shaq took a slow sip of his drink. He had met thousands of people in his life, fans, strangers, friends, and he had learned how to read moods. Something about this little table didn't feel right. The boy was too quiet for a child his age. The mother's hands kept fidgeting with her napkin, and the man's sharp eyes made the whole table seem uneasy. Still, Shaq didn't jump to conclusions. Maybe it was just his imagination. Maybe the family was tired, or maybe the man was simply protective. He turned back to his meal, trying to shake off the feeling. But the boy kept catching his eye. There was something about the way the child looked up now and then, his eyes scanning the room almost like he was searching for help. Every time Shaq caught his gaze, the boy quickly looked down again, fiddling with the toy from his Happy Meal. Shaq had always been known for his kindness, for his way of connecting with kids. He wasn't just a basketball legend. He was a role model, a larger-than-life figure who made children feel safe. And something inside him told him that this little boy wasn't just shy. He was carrying something he didn't know how to say. Shaq leaned back in his chair, his size making the wooden seat creak under him. He didn't want to make anyone uncomfortable, but he decided to stay a little longer than he normally would. If something was going on, he wanted to be around to notice it. His instincts, the same ones that had guided him through years of basketball and through life, told him this moment was important. At that point, Shaq couldn't have guessed what was about to happen. To him, it was just an ordinary visit to McDonald's, just another afternoon. But for the little boy at the nearby table, this ordinary visit was his one chance. And soon, with a whisper soft enough to be almost lost in the noise of the restaurant, he would change everything, not just for himself, but for everyone watching. Shaq had always been a people watcher. Even in crowded arenas, he used to notice the smallest things. How a fan held a handmade sign, how a kid's face lit up when he waved back, or how nervous a rookie player was before their first game. It was just who he was. He didn't overlook details. That habit didn't stop when he left the court. If anything, it became sharper. So, as he sat in McDonald's, quietly eating his burger, his eyes drifted back toward the small family he had noticed earlier. He didn't stare, but he observed, the way someone might casually glance around a room while still staying alert. Something about that table continued to nag at him. The boy sat almost perfectly still for a child his age. Kids usually squirmed in their seats, chattered endlessly, or tore open their Happy Meal toys with wild excitement. But this boy kept his toy close to him, not playing with it, just holding it tightly in his small hands. His shoulders were slightly hunched, and he kept glancing sideways toward the man across from him. Every time he did, his expression grew tense, almost fearful. The woman, likely his mother, kept giving him soft smiles, like she was trying to reassure him. But her hands betrayed her emotions. She twisted a napkin into tighter and tighter knots, her eyes flicking toward the man every few seconds, as if she was waiting for his approval before doing or saying anything. The man himself seemed out of place. He wasn't eating, not really. He had a drink in front of him, but he barely touched it. His posture was rigid, his jaw clenched. He didn't look like someone enjoying a family meal. He looked like someone waiting for something, or someone keeping watch. His eyes scanned the restaurant from time to time, sharp and calculating, landing briefly on Shaq more than once. Shaq lowered his gaze whenever their eyes met, pretending to be focused on his food, but inside, his instincts buzzed. Something wasn't right. Shaq had met thousands of men in his life. Coaches, teammates, opponents, businessmen, strangers. And he had developed a strong sense of character judgment. This man didn't give off the energy of a protective father. He gave off something darker, controlling, tense, dangerous. Shaq wasn't the type to jump into other people's business for no reason, but he also wasn't the type to ignore his gut when it told him something was wrong. He chewed slowly, his mind working. The boy's behavior troubled him the most. At one point, the child looked up and met Shaq's gaze for just a second. His eyes were wide, almost pleading, but as soon as the man shifted in his seat, the boy snapped his head down, clutching the toy tighter. That tiny action hit Shaq hard. It wasn't the look of a shy child. It was the look of a child who was afraid to be seen. Shaq leaned back in his chair, pretending to scroll through his phone, but his attention was fixed on the family. His massive frame blended awkwardly into the small seat, yet he seemed calm, almost casual, to anyone who glanced his way. Inside, though, his focus sharpened. He thought about his own children. He had always been protective, always teaching them to be strong, but also to know when to ask for help. If one of his kids had ever looked at a stranger with the kind of silent desperation this boy just had, Shaq would have wanted that stranger to notice, to care. Minutes passed. The restaurant buzzed with ordinary life. Orders being called, fries sizzling, kids laughing at the play area. But Shaq's world had narrowed to that one table. At one moment, the man leaned closer to the mother, whispering something into her ear. Her smile tightened, her eyes lowering quickly, as if whatever he said wasn't kind. The boy froze even more, his little hands squeezing his toy so tightly that Shaq could see his knuckles turn pale. Shaq exhaled slowly. He didn't know the whole story. Maybe he never would. But he knew fear when he saw it, and he had seen it too many times before, in strangers, in fans, even in teammates under pressure. Fear was universal, and this little boy's body language screamed it louder than words ever could. As Shaq finished the last bite of his burger, the boy shifted in his seat. Then something unexpected happened. As Shaq stood up to toss his trash, walking past the family's table, the boy's small hand twitched. It was subtle, but he seemed to hesitate, as if fighting the urge to reach out. His lips parted slightly, like he wanted to say something, but was scared to. Shaq slowed his pace, just enough to give the boy an opportunity without making it obvious. He tossed his trash and walked by again, closer this time. That's when he heard it. The boy leaned ever so slightly toward him and whispered something, so soft Shaq almost thought he imagined it. He didn't stop walking. He didn't react visibly, but inside, his entire body went still. That whisper, faint and fragile, carried words that couldn't be ignored. Shaq's heart thudded heavily in his chest. The quiet observation had ended. Now he knew for certain. This wasn't just an odd family moment. It was something far more serious. And Shaq was the kind of man who couldn't and wouldn't look away. Shaq had heard countless things in his life, cheers from tens of thousands of fans, the roar of basketball arenas, the laughter of his children, and even the noise of Hollywood sets. But the sound he had just heard inside McDonald's was different. It wasn't loud. It wasn't clear. It was a whisper, so faint that if he hadn't been paying attention, he might have missed it completely. The little boy had leaned forward just slightly, his tiny voice trembling. "Help us," he had said. 2 simple words, just that. Shaq's steps didn't falter. He kept walking to keep things looking normal, but inside, his mind raced. He wasn't a man who panicked easily, but the urgency in that child's whisper hit him hard. It wasn't the kind of whisper kids used when they were playing games. It was the kind that carried fear, desperation, and trust all at once. He dropped his tray into the bin, his massive hand tightening around the edge for a moment as he tried to process what had just happened. He couldn't turn around immediately. That would be too obvious. The man sitting at the table was watching closely, and Shaq knew the boy had taken a risk by speaking at all. So Shaq acted casual. He grabbed a napkin, wiped his hands, and slowly made his way back toward his seat in the corner. But his eyes, hidden by the angle of his head, were sharp. He studied the table again. The boy was now staring down at his Happy Meal as though nothing had happened. His toy sat on the table, untouched. The mother avoided eye contact, her shoulders slightly trembling as if she was silently pleading too. The man, on the other hand, hadn't noticed a thing. At least, Shaq hoped not. Shaq sat down, his frame once again filling the chair. But now his focus was razor sharp. He knew he had just been given a responsibility. That boy's words weren't random. They were deliberate. The child had seen something in Shaq, maybe his size, maybe his presence, maybe the kindness in his face, and decided he was the only person in that room who could be trusted. Shaq thought fast. He couldn't just storm over and ask questions. If the boy's fear was real, the wrong move could make things worse. He needed to be smart, to use his instincts both as a protector and as a man who had lived through countless high-pressure situations. His hand slid into his pocket, and he pulled out his phone. He didn't dial right away, though. First, he watched. The boy's eyes darted up at him once, just for a second, as if checking whether Shaq had heard. Shaq gave the smallest nod, subtle enough that no one else would notice. The boy quickly looked back down, relief flashing across his young face for just a heartbeat. That was all the confirmation Shaq needed. The whisper wasn't his imagination. The boy truly wanted help. Shaq unlocked his phone and pulled up the keypad. His thumb hovered over the numbers. He glanced around the restaurant. Most people were still caught up in their own worlds. Families chatting, workers on lunch breaks, kids running around the play area. Nobody else seemed to notice the tension at that one table. But Shaq noticed, and now it was up to him. He took a deep breath, his mind replaying the boy's soft voice. "Help us." The words echoed in his head, sharper than the noise of the restaurant. He thought about how brave it had been for a 5-year-old to whisper that to a stranger. That tiny act of courage deserved an answer. Shaq began dialing. His big fingers pressed the screen with steady control. He didn't look at the table now. He kept his head down, his body language calm. To anyone watching, it looked like a giant of a man casually scrolling through his phone while finishing his meal. But inside, Shaq was preparing for whatever was about to unfold. He knew that once he made the call, things would change quickly. Police would arrive. The man at the table might panic. The restaurant would be thrown into confusion. But there was no other choice. That whisper was too real, too urgent to ignore. The boy had taken a risk by speaking, and now Shaq had to take one too. As his thumb hovered over the final number, he glanced one last time toward the boy. Their eyes met again, and this time Shaq gave him a look, not a smile, but a steady, reassuring gaze that said, "I heard you. I've got you." The boy blinked rapidly, his lips pressing together, and for the first time since Shaq had noticed him, the child looked a little less alone. Shaq exhaled slowly, pressing the last number. His phone lit up, the ringing beginning in his ear. He leaned slightly back in his chair, keeping his voice low so nobody around him could overhear. 1-1, what's your emergency? Came the calm voice on the other end. Shaq's eyes flicked back to the family. The boy sat frozen, the mother's hands twisting her napkin into pieces, the man's gaze still scanning the room with suspicion. Shaq lowered his deep voice, speaking steadily. "This is Shaquille O'Neal. I'm at the McDonald's on..." He quickly gave the location, his tone firm. "There's a child here who just asked me for help. Something's not right. You need to send someone, fast." The operator confirmed, promising officers were already on their way. Shaq ended the call and slipped his phone back into his pocket, his face calm but his heart pounding. The whisper had been short, barely 2 words, but those 2 words had changed everything. And now Shaq knew he had stepped into a situation where the safety of a child, and maybe more, depended on what happened next. Shaq ended the call and slid his phone back into his pocket, his movements slow and steady. To anyone watching, he looked calm, like a man checking messages before finishing his soda. But inside, he felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. He had just made a decision that could change the course of the next few minutes, for the little boy, for the mother, for everyone in the restaurant. The police were on their way, but Shaq knew from experience that minutes could feel like hours when danger was in the air. The man at the table hadn't noticed the whisper or the call, but Shaq could tell he was restless. His leg bounced under the table, his sharp eyes kept darting around, and he leaned closer to the mother in a way that made her shrink back ever so slightly. Shaq had been in enough high-pressure moments in his life to understand one thing. Timing was everything. In basketball, a single second could decide victory or defeat. Out here in the real world, a single second could mean safety or disaster. He couldn't afford to make a wrong move. He adjusted himself in his seat, his giant frame leaning back, but his eyes never strayed too far from the family. He kept one hand resting casually on the table, but his mind was running through scenarios. What if the man tried to leave before the police arrived? What if he sensed something and turned violent? What if the boy or the mother were in immediate danger? Shaq's size alone was a weapon. He knew that. At over 7 feet tall, with hands big enough to palm a basketball like it was nothing, he was an intimidating figure. But he didn't want to escalate the situation by standing up too soon or confronting the man directly. That could put the boy at greater risk. Instead, he made another immediate decision. Stay close, stay calm, and stay ready. He stood slowly, picking up his drink as if he were simply stretching his legs. His towering presence naturally drew eyes in the restaurant, but he moved with ease, taking a spot a little closer to the family's table this time. He leaned against a pillar, sipping his soda, pretending to scroll through his phone again. To anyone else, it looked like a casual move. To Shaq, it was strategic. He was putting himself in a position to step in quickly if things went bad before the authorities arrived. The boy's eyes flickered up and found Shaq again. The child didn't say anything this time, but his small shoulders relaxed slightly, as if just knowing Shaq was close gave him a sense of safety. The mother, too, glanced up briefly. Their eyes met, And in that quick moment, Shaq thought he saw silent gratitude in her expression, like she knew he was watching, like she felt a shield around her now. But the man noticed the movement. His eyes narrowed slightly as he glanced at Shaq, sizing him up. Maybe he recognized him, maybe not. Either way, Shaq could tell the man was trying to read the situation. Shaq gave him a small nod, nothing more, just a polite acknowledgement, the kind strangers sometimes exchange. He didn't want to appear threatening. Not yet. He wanted everything to seem normal until the right moment. But inside, Shaq was alert, every muscle in his massive body ready. He wasn't just a retired basketball player. He had trained in martial arts, learned discipline, and understood how to stay cool under pressure. He also knew how to use his presence without ever throwing a punch. As the seconds ticked by, the tension grew heavier. The restaurant's cheerful noises seemed distant now, muffled by the sharp focus in Shaq's mind. He watched the man lean closer to the mother, whispering something that made her flinch. He saw the boy's small hands tremble as he gripped his toy tighter. Shaq's immediate decision had been the right one. Stay close, stay calm, but be ready to act in an instant. He took another sip of his soda, his deep eyes scanning the glass windows of the restaurant. No police yet. He estimated they'd need just a few more minutes to arrive. But in situations like this, minutes could feel like forever. Then, something shifted. The man pushed back his chair slightly, as if preparing to stand. Shaq's heart kicked up a notch. Was he leaving? Taking the boy and the mother with him? Shaq couldn't let that happen. Not when help was on the way. His voice, deep and steady, broke the silence. "Everything all right over there?" he asked, directing the question toward the mother, but loud enough that the man would hear too. The man froze, his eyes snapping to Shaq. The mother hesitated, her lips parting, but no words came out. The boy looked up again, his tiny face filled with silent hope. The man's jaw clenched. "We're fine," he said sharply, his tone edged with warning. Shaq didn't move, didn't escalate, but his gaze stayed locked on the man. Calm, firm, steady. A silent message passed between them. "You're not in control anymore." For the first time, the man looked unsettled. He shifted in his seat, his restless energy more obvious now. He muttered something under his breath, but Shaq didn't respond. He simply stayed there, a wall of strength, his towering frame making it clear that if anything happened, he wouldn't hesitate to step in. The seconds dragged. The man tapped his fingers against the table, his eyes darting toward the door. Shaq knew he was weighing his options. He also knew that every second that passed brought the police closer. And then, faint but unmistakable, the sound of sirens echoed in the distance. Shaq's ears caught it before anyone else reacted. Relief pulsed through him. His decision had bought enough time. He stayed exactly where he was, steady and calm, his watchful eyes never leaving the table. The boy sat up straighter, almost as if he sensed something good was about to happen. The mother looked down quickly, tears brimming in her eyes. Shaq had made his choice the moment he heard that whisper. He had acted quickly, calmly, and wisely, and now, the help they needed was finally on its way. The faint sound of sirens outside made Shaq's chest tighten with relief, but the moment wasn't over. If anything, the tension in the McDonald's grew thicker, like the air itself was holding its breath. The sirens were distant still, not close enough for anyone else in the restaurant to notice. But Shaq heard them, and he knew the man at that table might hear them soon too. The boy sat stiff in his chair, his small toy clutched so tightly that his knuckles were white. His eyes darted toward the door, then back to Shaq, then down to his food. The mother's hands trembled as she tried to smooth her napkin, shredding what was left of it. She looked like she wanted to say something, but fear kept her silent. And the man's restlessness only grew. He leaned back in his chair, his jaw tight, his eyes sweeping the restaurant with sharper intensity. Every shift of his body seemed to signal impatience, as if he was seconds away from making a move. Shaq knew this was the most dangerous moment, the time when someone like him could decide to run, lash out, or do something unpredictable. Shaq stayed steady. His massive figure leaned casually against the pillar, soda in hand, as though he had no concerns at all. But his mind was racing, planning. If the man tried to leave, Shaq was close enough to block the path. If he raised his hand to the boy or the mother, Shaq would step in instantly. And if he sensed the sirens and panicked, Shaq's presence alone might be the thing that kept him in place until the authorities arrived. Around them, the rest of the restaurant continued in its usual rhythm. Kids squealing in the play area, cashiers calling out order numbers, fries sizzling in the back. Most customers hadn't noticed the invisible drama unfolding in one corner. A few had glanced curiously at the way Shaq kept shifting closer to the family, but they assumed it was nothing. Only Shaq, the boy, the mother, and the man truly felt the weight of the moment. The man suddenly shifted, leaning forward toward the boy. His voice was low, but Shaq could see the child shrink back slightly, his shoulders curling inward. The man's hand tapped the table firmly, like a warning. Shaq's voice broke through the tension, deep and commanding without being aggressive. "Hey, little man," he said, looking directly at the boy. "What toy did you get in that Happy Meal?" The boy's head jerked up in surprise. For a moment, fear flashed in his eyes. Then he looked at Shaq's steady face, the calm strength in his expression. Slowly, the boy raised the toy from the table. It was a small plastic car, its bright colors gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Shaq gave him a big smile, the kind of smile that made kids feel safe. "That's a cool one," he said warmly. "Bet you can make it go real fast." The boy's lips twitched, the smallest hint of a smile fighting through his fear. For just a moment, he forgot the tension at his own table. For just a moment, he remembered he was still a child. But the man didn't like it. His glare shifted to Shaq, his eyes narrowing, as though daring him to interfere further. Shaq didn't back down. He held the man's gaze with calm confidence, never raising his voice, never making a sudden move. His size alone was a message, but his composure sent another. "I'm not afraid of you." The sirens grew louder now, faint but unmistakable. The man's jaw tightened. His foot tapped against the floor in a quick rhythm. He was starting to realize something was happening outside of his control. Shaq could see it in his body language, the way his shoulders stiffened, the way his eyes flicked toward the door more often. The mother caught the sound too. She lowered her head quickly, as if trying to hide the tears welling up in her eyes. Her hands gripped the edge of the table, knuckles trembling. She knew help was coming. She just had to hold on a little longer. Shaq stayed ready. He shifted his weight slightly, setting his drink down on a nearby counter so both his massive hands were free. To anyone else, it looked like nothing. But to Shaq, it was preparation. If the man bolted or lashed out, Shaq wouldn't hesitate to step in. The seconds stretched, every tick of the clock echoing in Shaq's chest. The boy kept glancing nervously at him, as if silently asking, "Is it going to be okay?" Each time, Shaq answered with the same steady look, reassuring without words, "Yes, I've got you." Finally, the sirens reached the parking lot. Their wail was impossible to ignore now. Heads turned. Customers paused mid-bite, whispering to each other. The man's eyes darted toward the glass windows, then back to the boy, then toward Shaq, his entire body tensed like a spring. Shaq straightened slowly, his towering figure rising to its full height. He didn't move toward the man, not yet, but his presence alone filled the space like a wall. If the man tried anything, he'd have to go through Shaq first, and that wasn't a fight he could win. The boy's small chest rose and fell quickly, his toy car clutched tight against him. The mother lowered her head, gripping her son's arm gently as if to hold him steady. Then the doors swung open. The first police officers stepped inside, their uniforms sharp, their expressions serious. The restaurant went silent for a moment, all eyes turning toward them. The man froze. His plan, whatever it had been, was over. The tension snapped like a rope pulled too tight, and the room shifted instantly from confusion to realization. Something was happening, and Shaq had known it all along. He didn't say a word. He just stood tall, steady, and unshaken as the officers moved swiftly toward the table. His job now was simple: make sure nothing bad happened before they could take control. And with the boy's whispers still echoing in his mind, Shaq silently promised himself he wouldn't let anything happen on his watch. The restaurant doors swung open with a sharp creak, and in stepped 2 police officers, their black boots clicking against the tiled floor. The sound alone was enough to change the entire mood inside. Moments ago, the McDonald's had been filled with chatter, the crinkle of wrappers, and the smell of fries. Now everything grew hushed. Conversation stopped. Children stared. Even the fryers in the back seemed quieter. The officers scanned the room quickly, their training evident in their eyes. One of them, a tall, stern-faced man, held his hand close to his belt. The other, a woman with sharp eyes and calm movements, walked a step behind him. They weren't here for a routine check. They were here for something serious. Shaq knew it instantly. He had seen this before. When police moved like that, with quick steps and searching eyes, it meant they already had information. And that information came from the boy's whisper. The man at the table stiffened as soon as he spotted the officers. His jaw tightened, his fingers tapping furiously against the surface of the table. His body screamed panic, though he tried to mask it with a hard stare. The mother's head dropped lower, as if she wanted to disappear. The boy's small hand tightened around hers, his knuckles white. Shaq leaned casually against the wall, but his eyes were sharp, locked on the man. Every muscle in his body was coiled like a spring. If the man made the wrong move, Shaq was ready. The lead officer stopped a few feet from the table. His voice was calm, professional, but heavy with authority. "Sir," he said firmly, "we need to ask you to stand up." The man froze, his eyes darting from the officers to Shaq, then back again. "What for?" he barked, trying to sound in control. "I'm just having lunch with my family." The woman officer stepped slightly to the side, creating a space between her and her partner. Her hand rested on her radio. Her voice was steady, almost soothing. "We just need you to come with us, sir. We'll explain outside." The boy's breathing grew quicker. He leaned into his mother's side, his small frame trembling. Shaq noticed the fear on his face and gave him a slow, reassuring nod, his deep voice rumbling softly across the room. "It's all right, little man. You're safe." The man noticed the exchange. His face darkened, frustration mixing with fear. "This is ridiculous," he snapped, his chair screeching loudly as he pushed back. His sudden movement made the mother flinch, and the boy duck slightly, as if used to sudden outbursts. Shaq's eyes narrowed. He took one step forward, his massive frame now towering directly over the scene. His presence was like a mountain moving into place, unshakable and undeniable. The man glanced up at him, and for a split second, his bravado cracked. The officers didn't miss it. The lead officer's hand went to his cuffs. "Sir, stand up now," he commanded, louder this time. The man's hands balled into fists. His body shifted as if he was about to resist, maybe even grab the boy. But Shaq's booming voice cut through the air like thunder. "Don't." That single word carried more power than a shout. It wasn't just a warning, it was a promise. Shaq's voice, deep and commanding, froze the man where he stood. Everyone in the restaurant could feel the weight of it. Parents pulled their children closer. Teenagers holding their phones lowered them slowly, too stunned to film. The mother looked up, her eyes shining with tears. For the first time that day, she saw hope standing in front of her in the form of a 7-foot giant. The sirens outside grew louder as more police cars arrived, their red and blue lights flashing against the windows. Backup was here. The female officer moved closer, her hand steady on her cuffs. She spoke again, this time more firmly. "Sir, you're under arrest. Don't make this harder." The man's breathing quickened. He looked trapped, like an animal cornered. His eyes darted toward the door, toward the windows, then back at Shaq, whose broad chest blocked his view like a wall of stone. The boy let out a small whimper, burying his face into his mother's arm. That sound, the helpless cry of a child, seemed to drain the last ounce of fight out of the man. His shoulders slumped, and with a frustrated growl, he finally raised his hands. The officers moved quickly. The woman officer grabbed his wrist, twisting it behind his back with practiced ease. The man cursed under his breath, but he didn't resist further. The clicking sound of the handcuffs snapped through the silent restaurant, sealing the moment. Shaq exhaled slowly, his massive shoulders relaxing for the first time in what felt like hours. He glanced down at the boy, who peeked up from his mother's embrace. Their eyes met, and Shaq gave him a gentle smile. "Told you you'd be safe," he said softly. The mother's lips trembled as she whispered, "Thank you." Her voice was faint, but full of emotion. She clutched her son tightly, her relief pouring out in silent tears. The man was escorted toward the door, grumbling angrily as the officers led him outside. Customers watched silently, some shaking their heads, others whispering in shock. A few even started clapping quietly, the sound spreading until the restaurant filled with the soft rhythm of applause. Shaq didn't bask in it. He wasn't there for praise. He was there because a little boy's whisper had asked for help, and he had been in the right place to answer. As the doors closed behind the officers and the arrested man, the restaurant slowly returned to life. The fryers hissed again, conversations restarted, and children laughed nervously as if trying to wash away the fear. But for the boy and his mother, the day would never be the same. And for Shaq, it was another reminder of why he always paid attention to the smallest voices, because sometimes they were the ones that needed him most.